who is chairman of the Group. He is a certainly right-leaning individual. We're going to be talking about Boris Johnson's announcement yesterday and whether or not actually we have got freedoms back or whether or not actually he is just lying to us. Boris Johnson lying? No, surely not. I'm not his ex-wife. Why would he do it to me? Ben, how are you?
I'm not too bad, considering it's 5 o'clock in the morning. How are you?
Yes, mate, thank you very much for getting on board with this. I do really appreciate you making the time for me. No doubt I will have to buy you lunch or something going forward, and I'm happy to do that. But anyway, right, Boris Johnson's big announcements. Now, for me, I want your take on it, obviously, but for me, it just seemed a little bit like freedom in name only. Things like the fact that he's going, masks aren't going to be a legal requirement, but it's up to the corporations. So obviously, you imagine they're just going to enforce it. Things like COVID passports, we're not going to make it legal, but if Wetherspoons decides to, then they can do it if they want. All of this stuff. Do you want to see him show a bit more leadership? What's your general take on Boris Johnson's announcement yesterday?
Well, the announcement yesterday was a speech, and the legislation that remains in place in Parliament continues to give government extremely strong powers to basically do whatever they want at any time in the future until those powers are repealed. So despite the fact that Boris is announcing this easing of lockdown measures and that we are told that everything is going to go back to normal by the end of July, in terms of freedom and how Parliament enfranchises the citizenry towards that freedom, there hasn't been a change. And I think the concern for a lot of people is that these measures are going to be relaxed, but at any time they can be put back on, either in a national or a regional sense. And also, as you say, there is all sorts of questions about what right companies and corporations and institutions and venues have to refuse service to people on the basis of whether they think they've got the best or the latest vaccine or whether they've had a recent test come through. It seems to be that a lot of that is being thrown out to businesses, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but there also needs to be at some point, and I would say at some point soon, some sort of legal framework whereby we know what businesses are allowed to do, what grounds they're, for example, allowed to refuse refunds for things if you haven't had the right vaccine and all that sort of thing, which is undoubtedly going to lead to a lot of confusion and mistakes and disruption to people's lives for the foreseeable future. So there are still big questions to answer. And as I say, ultimately, the freedom has not been handed back to the people.
No, the freedom has not been handed back to the people. It's been kind of passed over, hasn't it? And I think Boris Johnson, you can see from a political stance now, he is literally going to be able to say, well, hey, it's not me enforcing mask wearing in Tesco's. It's not me enforcing mask wearing on TfL. It's not me demanding that you need to have, a COVID passport if you want to go to the Dog and Duck. And technically, he's right about that, right? But he is palming it off, isn't he? And I just wonder whether or not actually he should be going the other way now and saying, okay, all right, look, you actually can't do that. Now, clearly he's not going to do that, and that's the problem, really, I think, as far as that's concerned. Are you actually concerned now, just given the announcement last night, or the speech last night, that frankly, these restrictions, things like masks, things like COVID passports, it looks to me, anyway, like they're just going to be here forever?
Well, I don't think that can happen. I mean, Theresa May gave a speech, which strangely was the most poignant speech in Parliament, that really, I think, brought it all home, that coronavirus, yes, is now a fact of life. But the desire to return to normality, I think, is stronger than the fear of the virus, or certainly will become so over the coming years. And so we've really got to look at ways of coping with it, in terms of healthcare, but also the emphasis must be on returning to normal, because one of the points that the Bow Group, the organisation I run, has continued to make is that there is another side to the coin, which is, aside from freedom and just wanting to go down the pub or just wanting to go to nightclubs, is a real question of how many deaths does the lockdown measures cause?
Exactly.
What level of damage to business, which also ultimately leads to death and deprivation, do these lockdown measures cause? And by carrying on with them for years or decades on end, that is going to have a massive cost to life. I mean, I do agree with the debate. I'm not like some people in this debate who, if people die, that's not something we should be overly concerned about. Yeah. I think the debate has to be led by the notion of life and what is going to lead to the best outcomes and the fewest people dying. And I think we've reached a a point, and perhaps reached it some time ago, where there's a strong argument to say the lockdown is doing more harm than good.
I absolutely agree, but I absolutely agree with that. I mean, the idea that we may or may not have 13 million people, the fact that we're even countenancing this, the idea that we could have 13 million people on an NHS waiting list for everything from cancer treatments to a hernia is absolutely ludicrous in a first world country, and it's the lockdown restrictions that are doing that. It's twofold for me, what you just said there. It's the fact that, yes, there might well be the number of deaths or prolonged illnesses that our lockdown restrictions are causing, but on top of that, what we don't know is the number of COVID-related deaths that it will take to slam us back into a lockdown. And this is where I'm at now, which is that it seems to me as though there's a constant sword of Damocles hanging over this nation. Boris Johnson, for me, was almost rolling the wicket for another potential lockdown, saying, hey, if you're not careful, then we'll have another one. And this is what I'm worried about. We can't really live our lives in constant fear that at any moment our Prime Minister might stand before us at a press conference at 5 p.m. one Tuesday and say, right, we're back in the lockdown restrictions. But that's where we are, isn't it, Ben?
Well, this is why I made the point about legislation, because Boris Johnson says a lot of things, and frankly, a lot of them aren't true. But when it comes to what goes on in Parliament, that is where laws are made, and that is where there is scrutiny in those laws being made. And as I say, in that regard, nothing has changed. The government withholds all the same powers that it did flowing from the Coronavirus Act of 2020. And if you read between the lines of what Boris was saying and what Whitty and others were saying, was that the winter is likely to see a rise in cases. We're already at 30,000 cases a day. That could rise to 100,000 in the next month, and then over winter that could go far higher. And so the groundwork has really been laid to a return to lockdown measures, and all of those legislative powers remain in place, and Boris would not need to consult Parliament from a legal point of view in terms of to roll that all out again. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean that the decision the government makes is wrong, but we have a Parliament there for a reason, and the Parliament is there to scrutinise the decision. It's not a perfect Parliament, and I think we need to make, but the Parliament is there to scrutinise government decision making and ask the sort of questions we are asking. How many people are the lockdown measures going to kill?
Which is a valid question, though. That's the point. This is the thing, Ben. We need to know this stuff. If you're going to stand before us and say, which he is, well, we might at any moment in time go back into the lockdown, could you do us the courtesy of telling us what the rules and regs about that might be? How many deaths a day are we talking about before you slam us back into it? How many cases are you talking about? Hospitalisations, etc. I just want to get you, Ben, on the idea, the notion now that I'm going to open the hypocrite files again, if that's right. Patrick Vallance, he's at Wimbledon, wasn't he? Mask. He loves masks so much. I would be amazed if he hasn't at some point written an ode to mask. This guy, right? But he was at Wimbledon again without one, and he's the latest in a long line of people now. By the way, I'm not coming at it from the point of view I think everyone at Wimbledon should wear a mask. I'm just saying if you happen to be the individual on my TV screen every day telling me I couldn't hug my grandma over Christmas, would you mind following the rules that you're saying that we should all abide by? And so I just wonder if actually now they've lost that ability to even tell us what to do, because it doesn't seem to me anyway as though they're bothering to stick to the rules or regs or really the moral element of it, I suppose, of what they're telling us all to live our lives by.
Well, I think, look, I'll admit to you that I've forgotten a mask from time to time, and those mistakes do get made. But I think when you are at that level, when you are effectively laying down the law to the public, you need to be extra careful because you don't want to create that perception that it's one rule for one lot and one rule for another lot. And I think, going to Wimbledon without a mask is not a great step in that direction. But, there have also been individuals like Matt Hancock who have done more interesting things in the regard of abuses of that position, and there are countless cases, frankly, in the UK and across the world where you see this sort of stringent rules laid down, and then the people laying down the rules are caught not following them, and I think that's very damaging, and it leads to a lack of public confidence not only in the rules but I think in politics in general. This idea that there's a sort of elite that play by a different set of rules to the public. You can see all that, and I think it is wrong for people in those positions to really disregard their own advice. But I think it is a good thing that we are moving to a position, so we're told, at the end of July, the end of this month, where mask wearing will no longer be compulsory, it will no longer be legally enforceable, so it will be up to the individual. And I think that's where we need to get to, really, because there will be people that want to wear masks all the time, and there will be people with different health conditions that make them especially vulnerable. If they want to walk around in a sort of beekeeper's hazmat suit, then I think that's fine. But I don't think it should be legally enforceable for everyone at this point, because, as I said before, I think we've now, after almost 2 years, we've now got to look at a way of returning to some semblance of normality. Of course, the mask is a small thing, but it interferes with socialising. It interferes with going to restaurants and bars and pubs and all things like that, and that has a big knock-on effect on the economy and mental health and all sorts of other things. So, I think the ultimate destination we need to get to is to put the people back in charge, and the people can make the decision whether they want to.
Because I'm worried we'll lose it. I'm worried that people will now not be able to get up and dress themselves in the morning unless Boris Johnson tells you to. I'm worried that we're heading that kind of way. And I think that's not great. Ben, I do indeed owe you dinner. Thank you very much for taking the time for us this morning. I really do appreciate it, mate. Thank you very, very much. Ben Harris-Quinney there, chairman of the Bow Group.